Christian Alliance SC Chan Memorial College 2015 DSE Paper 1 Question 2C. This is a question asking you to compare the sources with your own knowledge, and students are quite weak in answering this type of questions. So let me illustrate with this example. So the first source shows that a jailbird here, a jailbird, this is the jailbird, was so-called set free, but actually she's not set free. And the jailbird represents peace, and she's tied by an iron ball called the Treaty 1919. And beside her there are three men. Probably they represent the big three, the peacemakers of the Treaty of Versailles, of the Paris Peace Conference. They said, "Madam, you are set free," but actually she's not. So this picture aims to show that the peacemakers failed to make real peace. The second source is a criticism to Clemenceau. Here, Clemenceau is a comment on Clemenceau. It shows that according to Clemenceau, the fair and equal treatment based on Wilson's 14 points, that is to have a fair treatment, to have self-determination on different races, could only have the impact of shortening the interval of Germany's recovery. And hasten means to make it quicker. Hasten the day when Germany will once again take revenge on France. And Clemenceau sees the issue of peace in terms of France and Germany. Is in between France and Germany, but not of European civilization and a new order. So according to this writer, Keynes, he thinks that Clemenceau did not want to make a fair treatment. He only wanted to take revenge. He only wanted to issue the peace treaty in terms of France and Germany. He did not want to make a new order to European civilization. That means he's criticizing Clemenceau. He's quite negative to Clemenceau. So the question here, do you think that the criticism of the peacemakers at Paris Peace Settlement contained in sources C and D were fair? There are two tricks here. The first trick is the criticism of peacemakers. Fair. Pay attention. The question asks you to talk about whether the criticism in the sources were fair. You should not talk about whether the peacemakers here were fair. No. You should not talk about whether the peacemakers made a good decision. You should not talk about that. You should talk about whether the criticism here mentioned in sources C and D were fair. Let me repeat in Cantonese. 條題目呢就係想問你究竟喺 sources C and D 裏邊嗰啲對於 peacemaker 所作出嘅批評呢啲嘅批評究竟係唔係公平呢？ So if you mistook it, if you misunderstood it, according to the Marcus report, you will have low mark. Your answer will score low mark. So the second trick is here. Situations at that time. You should explain your answer using your own knowledge on the situations at that time. So what is situations at that time? That is the time that the sources were drawn, the sources were written. That is 1919. Okay. In other words, you should not talk about very remote historical facts, say the facts in 1930s about the rise of Hitler, because the situation after the Great Depression are very different to the situation in 1919. So if you talk about very remote facts, they are irrelevant. So the two tricks are mentioned in the Marcus report. This is the Marcus report, and you may further revise it, reading it more carefully. So it mentioned that the world politics changed a lot in the 20s, especially after 1929, the Great Depression. So it was irrelevant to cite facts from the 1930s. You score low mark if you mention these remote facts. So these questions ask whether the criticisms of the peacemakers mentioned in the sources were fair. 究竟呢啲批評喺資料裏邊嘅批評係咪公平呢？ Actually, these questions are very similar to the previous questions in the past papers asking about the sources, whether the sources are biased. 究竟嗰啲資料係咪有偏見嘅？ Or whether the sources give adequate facts. 究竟嗰啲資料係咪充分？係咪充足嘅？係咪充分嘅？ These questions ask you to compare 要比較 to compare the sources with your own knowledge 你要將嗰啲資料同埋你自己嘅知識去做一個比較 So how to answer it? These are the steps. Firstly, you should show the view in source C. So it mentions that the peacemakers failed to make real peace, right, according to the cartoon. And you should compare it with your own knowledge. You can show whether the peacemakers really fail to make the real peace. You can talk about the facts that say the rise of Mussolini in 1920s, the rise of totalitarianism. Pay attention, you should not talk about the rise of Hitler because these facts are very far away, very remote from the situations at that time. And secondly, you can talk about source D. Source D mentions that Clemenceau only want to take revenge. He did not want a fair and equal treatment. And then you can further compare it with your own knowledge to show that Germany was really punished harshly according to the Treaty of Versailles. Say she had to accept the war guilt clause, the sole responsibility of causing the war, etc. So here there are 4 steps. Step 1, talking about the failure of the peacemakers to make real peace, and give your own opinion whether the peacemakers really failed to make real peace. And the 3rd paragraph, you can talk about Clemenceau's aim, which is to taking revenge on France instead of making real peace, instead of bringing Europe to a new order of civilization. Then the 4th paragraph, you can talk about your own knowledge, whether Clemenceau really wanted to take revenge on Germany. Say you can talk about the war guilt clause, the sole responsibility, the only responsibility that France or the other peacemakers put on Germany. And the last point to remind you that each step here, you should give 1 paragraph with complete elaboration, that is TEER, topic sentence, example, elaboration, and RQ refer to question once again, each paragraph. And each paragraph you should give at least 7 lines, or sometimes say for source C, here the first source is rather short, then at least 5 lines for each paragraph.